Hi folks, welcome to another edition of Government Matters here on Focus Springfield. My name is Mike Hobbs. I'm managing editor for Reminder Publishing and your host for today's broadcast. And it's my pleasure and privilege to have Anthony Gulluni, the District Attorney of Hampden County, as our guest today. Thanks for coming by.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
I want to start off with doing something that talking a little bit about a subject matter that certainly in the last couple of years has been huge, and I think to a certain degree we've heard less and less about it, but I know that it's still a huge issue, and that's opioids. A lot of times now we're seeing stories in the press about law enforcement making huge busts on opioids and that type of thing, but what I want to find out from you is, what is your sense, especially from your point of view in the DA's office, do you think that we're, quote, winning the battle? Are we even making a dent in terms of the opioids coming in, and also in terms of actually having programs to help people? I mean, in Massachusetts, do you think that we're turning the tide at all? Because I never see any sort of stories about trying to describe what's happening now.
We offered a few different propositions there in terms of characterizing the battle, and I wouldn't say we're winning the battle. I mean, we're still losing 2 and 3 and 4 people a day here in Massachusetts on average. We're losing too many people to say we're winning a battle. But I would say that we're making progress. We are sort of turning the tide. I think that's maybe the best way to describe it, where we're still in the midst of a fight. And there's a lot of work to be done, and I think there's, unfortunately, still a bit of a long future ahead of us in terms of this fight, in terms of losing people, in terms of a struggle with this epidemic. But I think what folks in government, in my office in particular, have done in the last 4 years or so, really from the advent of this issue, in the mainstream at least. It's been around for a very long time, of course, but has really become a foremost issue, I think, for public safety and public health in the last 4 years. We are beginning to turn that tide, and I think a lot of that is on education, and I'm very proud of what my office has done, I think, at the tip of the spear in education and prevention work across this county and across Western Massachusetts, around talking to adults, parents, kids about this issue so they're sensitized and educated as to what's happening. As a matter of fact, just yesterday, I was at Agawam Junior High School in front of 500 7th and 8th graders, the whole school there, talking about opiates and talking about addiction and how this starts. And we present a video that we developed about 3 years ago in which there's 4 stories told about young people from different backgrounds who became addicted to opiates and other drugs. And they're in recovery, and they talk, hopefully about their stories and about their futures. So I think we're talking to young people, we're getting them to understand where the pitfalls are and how to avoid them. We're talking to parents how to educate their kids and have conversations that are preventative. And I think in the court system we're doing a very good job, which was really the other focus. It was a dual focus for us. And that's, going after folks who are profiting from the scourge of addiction. So we're trying to help and educate around people who have or will fall prey to addiction through the court system and through education and outreach. But we're also focusing on people who are profiting or seeking to profit from addiction, those dealers and major traffickers. And we've, been at the, at the point of a lot of these different investigations that have led to taking a lot of heroin and fentanyl off our streets. So it's a dual-focused approach, and I think with everyone else in the public health sector, in the addiction and recovery communities, from the governor on down in terms of government, working on this issue and focusing on it and having conversations, I think we are starting to see that turn. Fatal overdoses have been trending slightly downward, and that's as a result of the prevalence of Narcan. It's another thing that we've worked on very significantly in my office, making sure that first responders have Narcan. We're providing it for free with numerous partners through a program that we developed in the last few months, and talking about Narcan and how it can literally save lives, and making sure people have it, they understand how to use it, and people who are in families with people with addiction in particular have it. So it's a multifaceted approach, and I think we are beginning to turn that tide, as you said, Mike.
Let me just ask you about the Narcan program, because you introduced that late last year, earlier this year?
Late last year.
And basically, the premise of the program is to make sure that first responders actually have access to it. How has that gone? Have you seen police departments or fire departments, ambulance people basically step up and get Narcan for the first time for their organizations?
We have, and part of that announcement and part of that initiative is to make it more accessible or attractive for first responder departments, whether it's fire or police, to carry these as a matter of policy. Some departments are having issues in terms of negotiating something with relevant unions, but making this free really alleviates that issue for a city, a mayor, a city council, town manager, that, hey, this is very expensive. And indeed, Narcan is very expensive per dose. It has a shelf life of 2 or 3 months. So it's something that can be very costly, especially for a small town. So we've tried to offer this with our partner CHD and Bay State Health, you know, to alleviate that issue and make sure it's in as many hands as possible.
And you speak about community outreach. Let me ask you this. If you had the magic wand, what would you be doing now with a magic wand approach that you can't do now? Because everybody is, of course, controlled by their budgets, what they've got to work with, what they don't have to work with. What do you need as a district attorney in order to further this campaign against opioids?
Well, it's staff, it's resources, it's time. I think the first thing I would wave with that magic wand would be everyone's time and bandwidth in my office and the partnerships that we have. You know, from my perspective as district attorney in Hampden County, there are so many issues on which we have to work. There's obviously the court work that is hugely significant to public safety, and it's our core function. But from a community outreach standpoint, there are so many issues that are confronting young people and people across this county. Opiates is probably foremost among them still. But it's that time and it's the resources. What I've done in my office now, embarking on my second term here in March, is really double down, really invest heavily in our community safety and outreach unit. You know, I've expanded the bandwidth there more than it ever has been in my office, and I think it's probably the most robust program, or at least matches any program in any DA's office across the Commonwealth in terms of the work we're doing out in schools and with kids and you know, with various partners from the health sector to the addiction sector and so on and so forth. So, but we're still limited, and there's so many issues on which we're working. But I think, you know, again, getting back to that example just of yesterday, it's fresh in my mind, speaking to 500 7th and 8th graders. And some people may say, boy, those kids are young to hear about the issues of addiction and drug use. But I think a lot of people, we certainly understand that that's the time, and maybe even a little earlier, to have that conversation with them. So, you know, there's 23 cities and towns, of course, in Hampden County. And if we could do that in each and every place and, you know, confront those young people on our narrative of how to stay away from addiction, what to understand, you know, how it starts, et cetera, that whole curriculum. If I could get that out to the thousands and thousands of young people on a systematic basis, I think that would be my magic wand approach. And we're doing our best, and we're getting pretty close. And you know, the folks who work in my office and myself and, you know, even prosecutors go out really on a weekly basis and are working very hard to make that contact with young people. But, you know, with the numbers of people, of course, in this county and with the demands and the push and pull, it's a challenge. But if I had my druthers, we would be out, you know, 24 hours a day trying to prevent crime in the various ways that we can.
In terms of the reactions, I'm just wondering, what were the reactions like from those kids to the material that you presented? And I'm sure they probably had some questions about it.
I say this with no hubris at all, and I think pretty objectively, because I've been doing this now for over 4 years, really rapt attention. It was amazing. It was a terrific group. Like I said, about 500 kids at Agawam Junior High School, 7th and 8th graders. You're talking about kids, right, roughly 12, 13, 14 years old maybe. There was not a behavioral issue. There was not a young person taken out by a teacher. There, as far as I could tell, every kid was really in his or her seat paying attention. And it was phenomenal, because one of the first things that I did when I stood up before this crowd is say, you know, introduce myself, and I said, how many people here know someone, family or friend, who's dealing with addiction? Raise your hand. And it was 1/3 to 50%, I'd say,
wow,
of those kids who raised their hand unabashedly in front of their peers and said, yeah, I know somebody who is dealing with addiction. And again, we're talking about 7th and 8th graders. So it's a prevalent issue, and I think they understand the significance of it. So they're focused, and I think that's the beauty of this program, that we play a 27-minute video that my office produced, and then in partnership with the Sheriff's Department, we bring in 2 or 3 folks who are in the Sheriff's custody dealing with the issue of addiction and whose lives have been significantly affected by incarceration in many cases, by the issue of addiction and their own addiction. And these 3 people in the case of yesterday spoke to this group of young people about their personal experiences and really sort of pled with them, say, don't take my path.
Right.
You know, I became addicted, I committed a crime, I got in trouble, et cetera. Don't take my path. Listen to the message of the district attorney and his folks here. Listen to this video. So we really present a nice package that I think is very personal and very real. And the kids, I think across the board, but certainly yesterday, are really focused, and I think they understand the importance of it.
Excellent. I want to talk to you a little bit about the hate crimes task force that you've put together. This is something that keeps coming up, at least in the national press feed, about hate crimes, graffiti, vandalism, et cetera, et cetera. What are you seeing here in Hampden County in terms of the prevalence of hate crime?
Sure. I'm sure Governor Baker is going to be watching this, so I want to correct. I did not put it together. Okay. It's the governor's hate crimes task force that he and his administration formed about 18 months ago. And it's 15 individuals from across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts who the governor invited to be on this task force. Really spans the spectrum in terms of backgrounds and diversity and disciplines and experiences. There's some doctors, medical doctors, there's people, religious folks, there's a couple law enforcement people, of course, including myself. So very honored to be asked by Governor Baker to be a part of this hate crimes task force on an issue that I feel very strongly about, that I think is really, surging, unfortunately. If you look at statistics, we here in Massachusetts are, I think, at a 10-year high in the commission of hate crimes. So we're really charged by the governor and his administration to look at this issue in depth and meet, and we did rather frequently over the last 18 months, and this goes on, and specifically charged with making recommendations to the governor about what can be done systematically, what can be done in law enforcement, what can be done in education, about the issue of hate crimes and preventing them, and making sure they're policed and investigated and prosecuted should that need exist going forward. So a really phenomenal group, and it's working on a very important issue. And whether it's the political climate, whether it's social media, hate crimes are certainly kind of having a resurgence, which is unfortunate, and it's on all grounds, on race and religion and gender issues and so forth. So it's something that I feel very strongly about, and I'm happy to work on. And with the governor and his administration, I think we're going to do some very positive things. And I'm trying to learn from the folks on that task force and learn from the recommendations we make to the governor to bring back to my office on a somewhat smaller scale, and make sure we implement those things, and I can help protect people in our 23 cities and towns here in Hampden County.
In terms of that work, are you guys under a deadline to come up with a final report to give to the governor then?
So there were no real deadlines. I think the governor was pretty confident that we'd have a second term, and in fact he does now. So we got to work in maybe early 2018, maybe late 2017. And around the turn of the year, we made some recommendations to the governor. Actually had 2 or 3 meetings face-to-face with the governor, in which he sat with the 15 members of the task force and really conversed about the issue. And we personally made the recommendations to him on the issues of education, sort of as a category, and on public safety. And the administration is contemplating that, and we're hopeful that some of those things, if not all of them, will be implemented. But our work is going to go on. There's really no deadline or no end date for the task force. So I'm hopeful that I get to continue to participate and work on the issue for at least a year or 2 to come.
We have to talk a little bit as a follow-up to your recent announcement about the start of a 1-800 toll-free number for people who have suffered abuse situations at the hands of clergy. This is something that you just have announced very recently, and I have to ask, has anybody called?
There have been calls. Yeah, there have been calls. I've talked with the state police folks in my office on a regular basis, and there's been calls, and there was a call within 24 hours of our announcement. So we're hopeful it's a resource to people who may have been abused by clergy. We're hopeful it's a resource to families of those who have been abused over decades now. So, it was really a decision that I made that I thought it was important to provide a resource and a direct means of contact for people who were either recently or really historically abused by members of the clergy and members of the Catholic Church. And, really heretofore, up to that time of the announcement, most people were directed towards the church. And I just felt that was more or less inappropriate, and that if people so chose, they could come directly to law enforcement, speak directly to a state police detective who's trained in dealing with people who are witnesses or victims, and trained in dealing with victims of sexual abuse in particular. And we're hopeful that it bears fruit, and we're hopeful that it provides a resource to victims and their families going forward. And we're going to continue to publicize it to make sure that it's out there and it's a known resource.
Since that announcement, have you had any conversations with the diocese? Because I know they sent out a press release, but I don't know if they actually talked to you or any of your staff about it.
Quite frankly, no direct conversations, but they are represented by counsel, and I and members of my staff have had pretty regular communication with lawyers for the diocese. It is an ongoing conversation. It's an ongoing dialogue between law enforcement and the Springfield Diocese through its representatives in many cases about how we can improve this process. And as I said just a couple weeks ago at that announcement, Michael, I'm hopeful that this can be a constructive dialogue, right, and that we can do something that ultimately helps victims, both those victims who have had these issues a long, long time ago, and if there are people who are facing these issues or faced these issues more recently, that we can provide them with services, and law enforcement can investigate cases and make sure there aren't these people out there getting away with this and prone to do this again. So, but as I said in the press conference, I was rather frustrated with, I think, the nature of the communication and the responses that we were getting, and some discrepancies between what my office had, right, through its due diligence over the past many years from the diocese, and what the diocese had been putting out on its own, self-reporting that they had received from victims in terms of clergy sex abuse complaints. So, the conversation will go on, but I think it's incumbent on me to do what's right for public safety, to do what's right for victims, and give victims ultimately an opportunity to be heard, to be respected, and to have their cases heard. And if law enforcement can investigate a case and bring someone to justice, we're going to do that.
I know that there is a movement underway. There's been at least one meeting to try to improve the image of the city of Springfield. Apparently there's been some polling done in the Worcester area, and specifically about would you come here to MGM. And the response has been Springfield is a dangerous community. That's what we hear. Mm-hmm. Do you think that our negative kind of reputation is due to some members and outlets in the media that seem to like to talk a lot about criminal activity? Or do you really think that we have a problem here that is actually anything different than any other urban city of 155,000 people? I mean, I really think that sometimes issues like this are created are not necessarily truly indicative of what's happening. So what's your sense? Do you think that it's something that is created through the media and social, the traditional media and social media, or is it something that's actually that we're a dangerous town? Personally, I don't think so, but what do you think?
Yeah, it's certainly more the former rather than the latter. Let me say, and I'll say it very clearly, and I think you acknowledge this, we do have crime. We do have crime, but I think it's largely consistent with what any city of Springfield size has, and socioeconomic profile and so forth. But I'm very proud of the work that I have done and my office has done in the last 4 years with our law enforcement partners. And I think if you look at critical metrics, you're seeing downward trends and fairly significant downward trends on issues of crime and things like that. Like you, Michael, I think, I have lived in the city my entire life, and much of my family lives in the city of Springfield. And it's a city that we love and care about deeply and find to be a rather pleasant place to live. And I certainly don't worry about crime on a daily basis, whether at home or at work or things of that nature, at least for my personal life. I have to worry about it professionally.
Sure.
So I think it is a creation of various factors. And as you well know, media is in a business, and the business of getting people to read and look and listen and click. So sometimes these stories seem to sell, they're salacious. Crime stories have always been something that people are interested in. And I think on top of that, you have seen, whether it's social media or it's something else, a bit of a piling on Springfield. And it's maybe folks who are around the city who are not familiar with the city. Maybe it's some competitive spirit with Worcester saying, hey, Springfield's much worse than we are. But you do see that narrative. But I think we have to disabuse people, objective people, of the idea that Springfield is a particularly dangerous city. It's not. It is a safe place. It's certainly safe down here in downtown Springfield to frequent MGM and frequent Symphony Hall and the Mass Mutual Center, et cetera. And I think, the government here, along with my office, has done a very good job making sure people are safe. And really all neighborhoods across the city are safe places to live and places to visit. And one of the things that I always think about is, even in neighborhoods that are maybe lower on the socioeconomic scale, maybe have historically had problems, 99% of these people in these neighborhoods across the city are good, law-abiding, hardworking people. And it's that, 0.5 or 1% element that is committing crimes and that has problems, whether they're mental health or drug-related. And that's the element that we have to work on to make sure that people are safe and happy in our city and that the city grows economically and otherwise. And I think if you look at all the relevant factors and you look at some of the more objective assessments, city is trending upward and is, I think, at maybe the precipice of a renaissance, certainly spurred by the economic development in downtown Springfield. And I'm very hopeful and I'm very optimistic about the future of the city, and I'm very proud to play a small part in where this city is going and where this region is going. And I hope to continue to work on that for many years to come.
So just as a sort of a side question, a lot of people now are, even though we're not even at a year of MGM Springfield being here, there are people who are saying, well, geez, have they lived up to their various promises, et cetera, et cetera. And what I've been thinking about is all of the predictions I saw for increased crime around the casino area that many people made, everything from, someone mugging you because you've gone to the casino or you're going to the casino and you've got some money on you, to prostitution, to drugs, et cetera. Now, personally, I'm driving through downtown all the time and I don't see this stuff going on. Do you think that we've had any sort of increase in that kind of street level crime that some people said was going to happen with this casino opening up?
I can say pretty unequivocally that's a no. I see every report of every arrest that comes outside, comes from the casino, and by that I mean on the campus of the casino and in the physical buildings and so forth. And it's what I expected. It's born of alcohol consumption and late nights and those kinds of things, and they've been, relatively speaking, across the board, pretty minor things that I think anyone would have expected. Outside of the casino, there has been no uptick, as far as I am aware, and I would be aware,
right,
of those kinds of crimes. Where it's public safety or quality of life kinds of things, robberies, et cetera. It's not happening, and I think that's a credit to law enforcement, both the state police and the Springfield police, for being prepared and foreseeing the issues that were going to come and being staffed appropriately. And in particular, I think that metro unit of the Springfield Police Department is very visible. I am in downtown Springfield at least 5 days a week for work and here sometimes late at night. And you always see cruisers in the vicinity of the casino in the downtown area. So I think that very strong presence has certainly deterred crime and prevented crime. So it's been good, and I think that should be well known, and I think it should be made public to people who are considering investing in downtown Springfield, starting a business in downtown Springfield, and certainly those coming down here for a restaurant or for the casino or for a show at Symphony Hall or City Stage or at the Mass Mutual Center. It's a safe place, and with the presence of casino gambling and the big investment that MGM made, it's really been entirely positive from my perspective.
Well, I would also like to ask another question here before we wrap up. Your office is in the courthouse. I know part of your staff is in the Tower Square complex. Are you one of these people who wants to see a new courthouse? Since you're working there day in and day out.
I've been there upwards of 10 years now on a pretty much a daily basis, and I am somebody who thinks there should be a new courthouse. And I think the discussion has been accelerated by recent reports of health issues of some people who have been in the courthouse for long periods of time. So far as I know, unsubstantiated as to a direct connection between the building and those health issues. So there's a lot of conversation about a new courthouse, but you know, those issues are significant and they need to be vetted by the trial court and by the Commonwealth to make sure that we're safe in that courthouse. And what I've told my staff, and I've been very, I think, communicative with them on this issue about their health and about the health of that building. I'm there just about every day. So, you know, if I know of a serious issue, we're going to be the first group out of that building. But, you know, overall, seeing the growth of, you know, the needs of the criminal justice system and all the different entities and work that's done in that building, there's no question that a new building is required, really, at this point. The space is insufficient. I do think there are some security concerns with that building. And when I think you look at the environmental issues, all told, it's high time that I think the legislature and folks in Boston recognize the needs of Springfield and recognize the needs of Hampden County and begin the process of a new courthouse. You know, I personally think that if we were somewhere farther east, we would have had a new building some time ago.
Right.
And that's the nature of the sort of geographic inequity in Massachusetts. But we've got great legislators, great state representatives and senators, and the governor, of course, I have a lot of affection for and a lot of respect for. And I think it will be addressed, and it has to be addressed. It's certainly my opinion that it has to change, and we need a new courthouse.
DA, thank you very much for coming in today. As always, I think this is your second time.
It is.
And I'm sure we're going to have you in again to talk about these kinds of matters.
I hope so. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you. And thanks, folks, for watching this installment of Government Matters here on Focus Springfield.